The moment my daughter-in-law said those words, the whole table went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet you get when someone makes an awkward joke. The real kind. The kind where you can hear the candles flickering and the heat ticking through the vents and your own heartbeat somewhere in your ears. Follow my story until the end and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to start by telling you who I am because I think it matters. My name is Patricia, and I am 63 years old. I was born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, and I have lived in the same semi-detached house on Ravenscliffe Avenue for the past 26 years. After my husband Gerald passed, it will be 9 years this February. I kept the house. Everyone told me to downsize. My sister said the maintenance alone would eat me alive. My financial advisor, a very practical man named Howard, laid out 3 different scenarios on a spreadsheet to show me why selling made more sense on paper. I listened to all of them, thanked them, and stayed put. The house is where my son grew up. It is where we had every Christmas since he was 4 years old. It is where I still keep his old hockey stick in the basement, even though there is no good reason to, even though he hasn't lived here in 12 years. Some things you keep, not because they are useful, but because getting rid of them would feel like agreeing to forget. My son's name is Andrew. He is 37. He works in commercial real estate in Mississauga, which means he is good on the phone, good in a room, good at making people feel heard without necessarily meaning any of it. I love him. I have always loved him, but I want you to understand something about Andrew before I tell you the rest of this story. He is the kind of man who finds conflict so uncomfortable that he will rearrange the truth slightly, in real time, to make it go away. It is not malicious. It is just who he is. Gerald used to say Andrew would negotiate his way out of a burning building, which was meant as a compliment. But I thought even then that it depended on who else was in the building with him. Andrew met his wife Carolyn at a conference in Toronto about 10 years ago. She is 35. She works in marketing for a pharmaceutical company, and she has a daughter from a previous relationship, Lily, who is now 16, a serious, sharp girl who reads too much and apologizes for it, which breaks my heart a little every time. Andrew also has a son from a relationship before Carolyn, a boy named Jake, who is 14 and lives primarily with his mother in Guelph, but stays with Andrew and Carolyn every other weekend and most of the summer. Andrew and Carolyn have been married for 6 years and together for nearly 10. I say all of this up front because I know how these stories go, and I know that if the numbers don't add up immediately, people start doing math instead of listening. The children came from before. The marriage came after. Now you know. For the first 2 years after Andrew and Carolyn married, I tried. I want to be honest about that because it would be very easy to look back now and cast myself as the reasonable one from the start, but the truth is more complicated than that. I had my own adjustments to make. Gerald had been gone 3 years by the time they got married, and I was still learning how to be a person in a family rather than half of one. I sometimes called too much. I sometimes showed up without texting first, which Carolyn found intrusive, and which, if I am being fair, it was. We had our growing pains. I am not pretending otherwise. But somewhere around year 3, things shifted. It is hard to name the exact moment because it happened the way these things usually do, gradually and then all at once. The calls stopped being returned as quickly. The invitations to dinners started coming with a slight edge, a quality of being technically extended without being genuinely offered. When I was at the house, Carolyn had a way of leaving the room that was not quite leaving, more like repositioning herself just far enough that you felt the absence without being able to point to it. I told myself I was imagining it. Then I told myself I was being sensitive. Then I told myself that what mattered was Andrew and the kids, and that adult relationships are complicated, and that I was lucky to have a son who made an effort. I said these things to myself with the conviction of someone who knows they are performing acceptance rather than feeling it. But I kept saying them anyway, because the alternative was a conversation I did not know how to start. The financial part of our arrangement, and I realize now that calling it an arrangement is already doing some of the work that I had trained myself not to do, began the year after the wedding. Andrew called me one Sunday evening, casual in that particular way he gets when something is not casual at all, and mentioned that he and Carolyn were looking at a house in Port Credit. A good school district, he said, close to the Joe train. The mortgage was manageable, but the down payment was the sticking point, and with the way prices had moved, even with both their salaries, they were about $40,000 short of where they needed to be. Gerald had left me in a good position. Not wealthy, but comfortable. The house was paid off. I had my pension from the school board where I had worked for 31 years as an administrative coordinator, and Gerald had been careful about his RRSPs and his life insurance. I had the $40,000. I wrote them a check inside a week. I want to be clear that I did not do this because I expected anything in return. I did it because Andrew is my son, and I had the means to help, and I did not need the money sitting in an account more than he needed a home for his family. That is the whole story of why I did it. No conditions, no paperwork, no conversation about what it meant. A mother helping her son. That is all. Over the next 4 years, there were other times. A pipe that burst in January and flooded the finished basement, $6,000 of damage that their insurance covered badly. A period when Carolyn's company restructured and she was between positions for almost 4 months, and Andrew's commission income that quarter was light and there was a gap. A trip I offered to fund so the kids could see the Maritimes because Lily had been reading about the tides at Hopewell Rocks and I thought she deserved to see them in person. Smaller things here and there. Birthday money for the kids that was more than birthday money. A grocery run here. A utilities bill covered quietly there. I never kept a tally because I never thought of it as a tally. It was just what I did when I saw a need and had the means to meet it. I think the total, if I were to add it honestly, would be somewhere around $90,000 over 4 years. I am not sharing that number to make a point about ingratitude. I am sharing it because it is relevant to what happened next, and because I think you deserve to have the full picture. The Thanksgiving situation was the first crack I couldn't paper over. Andrew and Carolyn host Thanksgiving now, have done for the past 3 years. Since their house is bigger and has the dining table that seats everyone. My sister Beverly comes, and Andrew's aunt on Gerald's side, and sometimes a neighbor couple that Carolyn is friendly with. It is a good gathering, usually. I make the sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping that Andrew has requested every year since he was 12, and I bring a bottle of the Ontario Riesling that Gerald used to love, because it makes me feel like he is at the table in some small way. This past Thanksgiving, I arrived and immediately felt something off. Not dramatic, just a flatness in how Carolyn greeted me at the door. A quality of efficiency rather than warmth. Andrew was in the kitchen managing the turkey and called hello from across the house. Lily came and hugged me, which she always does, bless her. Jake was on his phone on the couch and gave me a wave that was probably about as much as I could reasonably expect from a 14-year-old boy. Dinner was fine. Dinner was actually quite good. The turkey was excellent, and I said so. We talked about Lily's school play and Jake's hockey and a renovation Andrew was thinking about for the back deck. Normal things. Family things. I felt myself relaxing. It was during the clearing of the plates that it happened. I had gotten up to help, stacking things and bringing them to the kitchen, and I accidentally knocked Carolyn's good serving dish, the ceramic one she bought on a trip to Quebec City, the one she mentions whenever it appears on the table. I knocked it against the counter, reaching past her, and it chipped. Not badly. A small piece, the size of a thumbnail, off one corner. I immediately apologized. I said I was sorry. I would replace it. I felt terrible. Carolyn looked at the chip for a moment. Then she looked at me, and I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen quite so nakedly before. Not anger exactly, more like the particular exhaustion of someone who has been tolerating something for a very long time and has just used the last of their tolerance. "It's fine," she said, in a tone that meant it was the opposite of fine. I started to say something else, and she cut across me, not loudly, almost pleasantly, the way you'd say something you'd rehearsed enough that it came out smooth. "You know, Patricia, you're honestly more trouble than you're worth." The kitchen went still. Andrew was right there, 2 feet away, holding the gravy boat. I stood there with a stack of dirty plates in my hands, and I looked at my son, and he looked at the gravy boat, and the gravy boat said nothing, and neither did Andrew. Beverly was in the doorway. She told me later that her mouth just fell open. She didn't even realize until afterward that she was still holding a folded napkin in each hand. I set the plates down very carefully because I was aware that my hands had started to shake slightly, and I did not want to drop anything else. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said. I meant it as a pivot, as a graceful exit from the conversation. Carolyn took it as an invitation. "I just think you have this idea," she said, still in that calm, rehearsed voice, "that because you help out financially, you have a certain claim on us, on our time, on how we run our house. And it's a lot, Patricia. It's a lot to manage." I heard Andrew make a small sound. I didn't look at him. "I help because I want to," I said, "not to claim anything." "Maybe," she said, "but it doesn't always feel that way." I said I needed some air, and I went outside through the back door and stood on the deck in the October cold without my coat. And I looked at the backyard where the leaves had mostly come down and were lying flat and wet against the grass, and I breathed. Beverly came out after about 3 minutes with my coat. She didn't say anything. She just put it around my shoulders and stood next to me. "Well," she said finally. "Yes," I said. We stood there a while longer. Andrew came out eventually, looking wretched, and said that Carolyn hadn't meant it the way it came out, and that she was under a lot of stress at work, and that he was sorry. He put his hand on my arm. I looked at his hand, and I thought about $40,000 and a burst pipe and 4 months of commission gaps and a trip to see tidal bores. And I said that I was sure that was true. And I was glad the turkey had been so good, and I drove home. I did not call for 3 weeks. Andrew called twice. I was polite and brief and gave him nothing to work with because I did not yet know what I wanted to give. I needed to sit with what had happened. I needed to stop talking myself out of what I had seen on Carolyn's face, which was not stress and not a bad day, but something much more settled and decided than either of those things. In November, Andrew called on a Sunday evening again in that casual way and mentioned that they were planning to refinance the Port Credit House and that with rates where they were, it would actually make a lot of sense for me to be listed as a co-signer on the mortgage, just to help their application, not a financial commitment in any real sense, just a signature, just a formality. I said I needed to think about it. He said, "Of course, take your time." I thought about it for exactly 48 hours. Then I called my own lawyer. a woman I had used for Gerald's estate, and I asked her what co-signing a mortgage actually meant, legally, for a woman my age with a paid-off house and a pension. She told me, clearly, plainly, the way I needed to hear it. It was not a formality. It was a material financial commitment. If they defaulted, I was liable. Given my age and my assets, it would be my house on the line. I called Andrew back and said I wouldn't be signing anything. There was a pause on the line that lasted just long enough for me to feel its shape. "Okay," he said. "I'll let Carolyn know. I want to tell you about Christmas because that is really what this story is about. And I have been taking my time getting here because the Thanksgiving piece matters. It matters because what happened at Thanksgiving set the terms for what happened at Christmas, and because I think if you haven't walked the road with me, the Christmas part might look like an overreaction when it was actually the opposite. It was the most measured thing I have ever done in my life. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. I stood in front of my closet on Christmas Eve, and I held the garment bag with my good burgundy cardigan in it, and I thought I could just not. I could call, say I wasn't feeling well, spend Christmas here with Beverly and the bottle of Riesling and the dog, and no one could tell me I'd done anything wrong. The out was right there, but Andrew had called the week before and said the kids were asking about me, especially Lily, who had apparently been telling everyone at school about something I'd sent her in the mail. I'd found a used copy of a novel she'd mentioned wanting, tucked a note inside. That was the thing about Lily. She always noticed. So I went. I drove to Port Credit on Christmas Day in the light snow we'd had overnight, and I brought the sweet potato casserole and the Riesling and a gift for each of the children that I'd put real thought into, and I was determined to be present and warm and to hold my own counsel about the rest of it. The morning was genuinely nice. Lily showed me what she'd gotten, enthusiastically the way she only does when she's really pleased about something. Jake let me watch him demonstrate a new video game for almost 15 minutes. Which felt like a significant offering from a 14-year-old. Andrew made good coffee, and we sat in the kitchen and talked about nothing important in the way that is sometimes the most intimate kind of conversation. Carolyn was pleasant, measured but pleasant, meager but pleasant. I thought, maybe we are past it. Maybe the Thanksgiving thing was the worst of it and we are coming out the other side. Then came the afternoon. The gifts had been opened, the dishes from the mid-morning brunch were soaking, and we were all in that suspended, slightly unfocused state of Christmas afternoon where you're not quite ready for dinner, but not sure what else to do with yourselves. Lily had gone to her room with her new books. Jake was on the couch with his game. Andrew had fallen asleep in the armchair. Genuinely, I looked over and he was just gone. The way men do. I was in the kitchen, helping or trying to. I'd offered to prep the vegetables for dinner, and Carolyn had set me up at the island with a cutting board and the carrots and the parsnips, and for a while it was fine. Just the sound of the knife on the board and the oven running and the radio playing something forgettable. I noticed that the kitchen counters had a new piece of something, a small bread box, brushed brass hardware, very nice. I said it was lovely. Where had she found it? She told me. I made an appreciative sound. Silence came back. Then Carolyn opened one of the lower cupboards and stood up with a particular expression, the expression of someone who has found something out of place. She looked at the counter, looked in the cupboard again. "Did you move the large pot?" she said. I said I hadn't touched anything except what she'd asked me to prep. She checked another cupboard, made a small noise, found the pot, then she straightened up and looked at me. And I saw it again, that same quality I'd seen in October, that settled, decided thing under the surface. I just don't understand, she said, and her voice had shifted slightly, become something harder and more deliberate. Why you always have to insert yourself into every corner of this house like you own the place. I put down the peeler. I am cutting the carrots you asked me to cut, I said. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Then tell me plainly what you're talking about. She set the pot down on the counter. Andrew was asleep in the other room. The children were upstairs. Honestly, Patricia, she said, and I mean this sincerely, you are the most exhausting person I have ever had to manage. You insert yourself, you expect gratitude for every little thing, you make everything about your feelings, and frankly, and I know this is harsh, but it's honest, I don't know what Andrew would actually lose if you just stayed home. The kitchen was very quiet. I thought about the peeler in my hand. I set it down carefully on the cutting board. I thought about a lot of things very quickly, the way you do. I thought about a check I had written on a Sunday afternoon while the radio played and Gerald's empty chair sat across from me. I thought about Lily and the tidal bores. I thought about October and Andrew looking at the gravy boat. I thought about a mortgage I had declined to sign and the pause on the phone that had followed. I looked at Carolyn. Let me be very clear with you, I said, because I think we have been unclear with each other for a long time and I am tired of it. She started to say something and I kept going. I have given this family significant financial support over the past 4 years, not because I expected ownership of your cupboards or your time or your gratitude, because Andrew is my son and I love him and you were building a life and I have the means to help. That is why I did it, not to manage you, not to insert myself, because I love my son. She crossed her arms. But I want you to understand something, I continued. That support was freely given, and it can just as freely stop. Not as a threat, not as punishment, simply as a fact. I am a 63-year-old woman, and I am not obligated to fund a household where I am not welcome, and I have been very patient about this, and I am done being patient. The sliding door opened. Andrew was standing in the doorway from the living room, sleep-creased and confused, looking between us. What's, he started. Your mother and I are just talking, Carolyn said. We are done talking, I said. I picked up my cardigan from the back of the stool, where I'd draped it. I went to the closet for my coat. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, that perceptive girl, reading the room instantly. I told her I loved her, and I would call her, and she looked at me with something in her eyes that I am still not sure what to do with. It was older than 16, that look. Andrew followed me to the front door. He was whispering in that urgent, unhappy way he gets. Mom, don't do this. It's Christmas, Andrew, I said. I am not doing anything. I am going home. What I am also going to do in the new year is speak to Howard about restructuring some of my finances. Not because I am angry, because it is the right thing to do and I should have done it sooner. What does that mean? He said. It means I love you, I said, and I am your mother, not your bank. I drove home in the early Christmas evening, the streets quiet and gray-white, the lights in the houses going by like slow film. I put the kettle on. I called Beverly. I sat on the couch with the dog and the Riesling I had not left at Andrew's house, because some instinct had put it back in my bag on the way out. And I poured a glass and I let myself feel everything I had been not feeling for a year. It was sad. I want to tell you honestly that it was sad and that the satisfaction I felt was complicated, the way real satisfaction usually is, because it was tangled up with grief for the easier version of this family that I had spent a long time pretending we were. In January, I did speak to Howard. I made some changes. The regular informal support stopped. Not with a letter, not with a dramatic announcement. It simply stopped, the way a tap stops running when you turn it off. Andrew called in February. We had a long conversation, the kind we should have had at Thanksgiving, maybe earlier. He cried. I cried. He said he had known for a while that things were not right, that he had let himself look away from things he should have faced, that he was sorry. He said he and Carolyn were going to see someone, a counselor, to work through some of what had accumulated between them. I told him I thought that was good. I told him I loved him. Both of those things were true. He asked if I would come for Easter. I said I would think about it. Carolyn sent me a text in March. It was not an elaborate apology. It was 4 sentences, and 3 of them were somewhat defensive, but the 4th one said, "I know I crossed a line and I'm sorry. That is not nothing. I have been thinking about what to do with it, and I have not decided yet. I am in no hurry. Lily calls me on Sunday afternoons. She called last Sunday and told me she'd finished the novel and wanted to know if I'd read the author's other books. We talked for almost an hour. I have not lost the things worth having. I am still in the house on Ravenscliff Avenue. Gerald's hockey stick is still in the basement. The Riesling I poured that Christmas evening was the last of the case I'd bought the year he died, and I have been thinking I should order more, because he would have said life is too short to drink bad wine and too long to run out of the good kind, and he was right about both. I don't know exactly what Easter will look like. I know I will bring the sweet potato casserole, because Andrew has asked for it every year since he was 12, and some things you don't stop for the sake of making a point. I know I will hug Lily, and I will watch Jake pretend not to be happy to see me, while obviously being a little happy to see me. I know I will sit at a table with my son and his wife, and I will be fully myself, clearly and without apology, and I will not make myself smaller to make the room more comfortable. I have been doing that for too long. I am 63 years old. Gerald is gone, and the house is quiet, and the time I have left is mine to spend as I see fit, and I intend to spend it honestly. That is all any of us can really do. I keep coming back to the moment I set the peeler down on that cutting board. It was such a small gesture, but I think it was the most honest thing I had done in 4 years. There is something that happens when you give generously for a long time and receive contempt in return. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the slow accumulation of small dismissals, of exits from rooms, of tones that mean the opposite of what the words say. What happens is that you start to doubt your own reading of things. You start to wonder whether the problem is your perception rather than the reality. And so you adjust. You make yourself quieter. You apologize for taking up space. You convince yourself that keeping the peace is the same as having it. I did that for years with Carolyn. I told myself it was maturity. It wasn't. It was avoidance dressed up as grace. What I understand now, sitting here in the house on Ravenscliff with the dog at my feet and a cup of tea gone cold beside me, is that genuine kindness and honest self-respect are not opposing forces. They move together or they don't hold. When I gave money without speaking plainly about what was happening between us, I was not being generous. I was being evasive. I was buying a version of family harmony that was never real, and I was paying for it with my own dignity alongside my savings. The thing about Carolyn's words, "more trouble than you're worth," is that they were clarifying. Cruel, yes, but also clarifying in a way that years of careful navigation had not been. Because once something is said that plainly, you cannot unknow it. You cannot smooth it back into ambiguity. And what I found, standing in that kitchen, was that I did not want to unknow it. I wanted to finally see it clearly and respond to it honestly, knowing what is actually true rather than what is comfortable. That took me a long time to choose. I had the information much earlier. Andrew looking at the gravy boat at Thanksgiving while his wife spoke to me that way, I knew then. I had known for longer than that probably, but knowing and choosing to act on what you know are different things, and the distance between them can be very wide when you love the people involved. What finally moved me across that distance was not anger. It was a kind of clarity about what I owe myself at this stage of my life. Gerald is gone. The children are raised. The house is mine. And the pension is mine, and the years I have left are mine. I spent a long time believing that making myself smaller was a form of love. I do not believe that anymore. Love, real love, does not require you to absorb cruelty in silence. It does not require you to fund a household where you are not genuinely welcome. It does not require you to sign documents that put your home at risk out of guilt you were never meant to carry in the first place. Andrew and I are finding our way back to each other. It is slow and it is not finished, but it is honest in a way it wasn't before, and honest is where I want to be. Lily called again last Sunday. We talked about books and about the winter and about nothing in particular, the way you can with someone who actually wants to hear what you have to say. I am not going to let grief about what went wrong swallow what is still good. There is still quite a lot that is good if I am willing to see it. The sweet potato casserole recipe is already written out on the index card on my fridge. I made it every year since Andrew was 12. I intend to keep making it. Some things you don't stop for the sake of making a point, but some things you do stop, and you stop them clearly, and you do not apologize for it. That is the difference. And it took me 63 years and one ruined Thanksgiving dish to learn it properly.